Hello and welcome everybody. This is the Data Security for Solopreneurs and Microbusinesses webinar. So I'm Cristina from CVG Solutions and I'm a GDPR expert.
Hi there, I'm Deborah and I'm a cybersecurity expert.
And hi, I'm John from East Yorkshire Insurance Brokers and I'm a commercial insurance expert.
Fantastic. Thank you guys. Okay, here we go. Hello, come on, go. No. Oh, right, let me stop share. Let me share again. I don't know why it does this sometimes. Right, let's start. Okay, all right, can you see my screen, yeah? Right. Yeah. Okay. So here at CVG Solution, we aim to make GDPR sweeter, simpler to understand, simpler to implement. And, our mantra is to educate, empower, and enable you to drive business growth. We use the 3 stages maturity life cycle, which is educate, because you don't know what you don't know. And I truly believe that knowledge is power, and educating yourself will then empower you to make informative decisions, to operate with a robust framework, to apply protection by design thinking, and also foster a mature culture within your business. These will then give you the foundation and enable you to apply continuous improvement, provide value add to your customers on a continuous basis, but also increase your confidence in bidding for bigger contracts. Okay, so all of my clients have gone through this life cycle, and at the end of it, they've all reported increasing revenue, in some cases even doubled it. So I wanted to use today to kill some myths. So the first one is, I'm registered with the ICO, therefore I'm compliant. So unfortunately, that is not the case. Yes, you do get a certificate once you've registered and paid, but all it is, it's a receipt. It just simply says that you paid your tax. So don't confuse that with a certification of compliance. So there isn't actually such a thing as a certification of compliance for GDPR, at least not just yet. To know whether you need to register and pay or not, if you go to the ICO webpage, just simply Google ICO. On the top right-hand corner, there is that call out that says pay free, pay fee, renew fee, or change your details. Just click on it. Follow the path, and then you get to a self-assessment, answer those few questions as honestly as you can. If it says you've got to pay is not a lot of money, and then you get the certificate, which is literally just a receipt. So keep it safe, because you never know, you might be asked to produce it as proof of payment. If the result is no, you don't have to pay, good for you. I would suggest that you take a screenshot and then keep it safe, again, just in case someone comes ask, you can then prove you've got the proof. The other one, it's our software is fully GDPR compliant. There is no such thing as a software that is GDPR compliant. It's the purpose and how you use the software and the data that makes it compliant. Our data is fully GDPR compliant, so it's the same thing. There is no such a thing as data that is GDPR compliant. It's how and what and why you're using it that makes it compliant. And then finally, we have all security measures in place. We are good. I mean, great. If you've got all of the security measures in place, that's fantastic. Unfortunately, while security is important, there is a lot more to GDPR. There are 99 articles, only 1 is about security. The regulation is based on 6 key principles. 1 is about security, but 5 of them are about purpose. So what I'm saying is, obviously security is important, but you've got to also look at the others and look at the bigger picture. So just very quickly give you an overview of the structure of the regulation. So as I said earlier, the regulation is based on 6 key principles that sometimes refer to 6+1, because there is an additional one which is called accountability. And the regulation gives you plenty of tools and opportunity to demonstrate the accountability. And there is a big section of the regulation that is based on the rights of an individual. So you as an individual consumer, you have rights. So your customers, they also have rights, as well as your employees. And then you as a legal entity, as a business, you have a bunch of obligations that you need to apply and comply with, some of which are in relation to the rights and the principles, as well as others. And one of your obligation is security. I wanted to share this with you because I thought it was, gives a nice perception. So when the regulation first came out, Gartner, they did a prediction. So Gartner is a global analytic organization. They do all sorts of analysis. And what they predicted is that by 2020, only 10% of the world population would be impacted by privacy law. They then reviewed that, and the latest prediction is that by the end of this year, so by the end of 2023, 65% of the world population will be impacted by privacy law. And we see that actually because we have California, they've developed their own data protection, Virginia, Brazil, and all sorts of other countries are doing that. And they're all looking at the EU GDPR as the best in class. So they're all using bits and pieces and from the EU GDPR. So what I'm trying to say here is that the UK GDPR, because that's how it's called now since Brexit, is not going to go away. So the sooner you come on board, the sooner you accept it, the sooner you can apply to your business, and the sooner you'll be ready for any changes that might come along. And there will be changes, unfortunately. So we have developed some key tools specifically for solopreneurs and micro businesses. So we have developed an e-learning platform based on what I said earlier. The education is power. You don't know what you don't know. So our GDPR training on your terms offers you a bunch of modules, which each module is a different topics. You can mix and match in terms of your needs, but also in terms of your budget, so total flexibility. We've also developed the GDPR toolkit, which is the toolkit that will enable you to implement the regulation within your organization. It has 38 plus tools, and I say plus because we keep adding to it. It's a combination of policies, processes, procedures, notices, agreements, and then actual tools. It also, as part of the membership, there are also monthly surgeries where you can tap into me directly for any questions that you might have that are specific to your environment. And also the membership gives you access to the Knowledge Vault, which is packed with useful videos that, to carry on continuing your education. So today, as I said, the regulation is based on 6 principles. Today, we're going to focus on security. Please do not forget about the other 5. They are equally important. So the regulation says that the controller is responsible for security. So who is the controller? So the controller is the entity, the legal entity that determines the purpose and the means of how the data is being processed. Okay, you're not any wiser. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you are the entity that decides how to use the data, how and where to store it, who to transfer it to, who to share it with, how long to retain it, and a bunch of other decisions, then you are the controller. And therefore, you're responsible for security of the data, obviously, but we're talking about data. So again, this is from the latest ICO report. A new one is due in a month or so. So for now, it's still the latest report. So the ICO in their last year report said that they received 9,571 data breaches, and they basically said that 43% of them, they were due to human error. So sending an email to an incorrect recipient, and that is so easily done. Who has not done it? I know I've done it, so I'm guilty of that, because it's so easily done, okay? Especially with the auto-populate on Outlook. Oh yes, that's the guy, press the button, off he goes, because you're in a hurry and you don't look at it twice. So it's so easily done. So while you've got to obviously put provisions in place to protect yourself from cyber attacks, phishing, ransomware, which Deborah will go into more details later on, but there is also the human error, the human element that you've got to manage and to reduce your data breaches or avoid data breaches. So how do you do that? How do you avoid data breaches, especially in the human error side? So you apply the 3 T's, and that is training, training, and more training. So as I mentioned earlier, there is our e-learning digital platform, but we also do live workshop and bespoke training. So, and you don't just do it one-off, just once and that's it, done. You should be doing refresher training every year. The regulation asks for that. If you are bringing in new members of staff, new contractors, new volunteers, you should be providing them with GDPR training within the first month of employment. That is one of your obligations as a controller. So, so you can do a mix of different type of training to help you, to reduce your data breaches, but also to maintain your compliance. Because GDPR is the responsibility of everyone within the organization. So in very lame terms, a data breach is a compromise of the CIA. What is CIA? CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So a compromise of any of these or all of these, it's a data breach. So, for example, in the previous house that we were living, we kept receiving for the first few years a letter that was addressed to someone else but had our address on it. And it was a mortgage statement that would come every year. Now, we know that those individuals never lived at that address. So, it took us a while to get the bank to fix it, but eventually they did correct it. So that is an example of a data breach when it comes to integrity, because the data was incorrectly aligned. So they had someone else aligned to our address. So that's an example. Someone else earlier on in the week made me aware of a situation, and I'm going to keep this anonymous. So she's undergoing some medical treatment through a private, privately, through a privacy insurance. And so a few things have not gone well, so she complained, and they responded, but not to her, to her son. So this is another example of a data breach when it comes to integrity. If the letter also contained information about a medical situation, that would also be a breach of confidentiality. So this is how, so a data breach doesn't have to be something huge. It can be something as simple as that. So obviously, a ransomware, a cyber attack is, a breach of availability, because most likely you lose access to the data, and in a way that it's unlawful, but also, a breach of security, and also unauthorized access. So, so these are just a few examples of data breaches in different scenarios and how the CIA apply. There are different types of security measures. My colleague Deborah will talk to you about the technical security measures, but there is also physical measures. So if you operate with a lot of data on paper, so you might want to consider, having a fireproof and lockable cabinet and drawers. There has been an incident where a pharmacy, for example, all of the patients' files were in a cabinet, but it was not fireproof. The pharmacy unfortunately suffered a fire. The cabinet obviously was destroyed, as well as the data within it. They were fined 275,000 because they did not put in place, a simple security measure. So consider that. They also operate a clean desk policy. So even if you're working from home and you are a solopreneur, but there are other people within the home, your partners, your children, guests that might come around. So they are not authorized to see the data. So please put it away. The other one is lock your screen when you're moving away. Get into the habit of doing that, even if it's just you in the house. Just, you're going to get yourself a cup of tea, lock the screen. You're answering the door to the postman, lock the screen. The reason for this, because next time you're going to be meeting a client or someone that you might want to collaborate with. You're meeting in a coffee shop, you got your laptop open, you say, oh, I'll go and get the coffee for us. And you leave the screen on, because we are creatures of habit and it's just so easily done. And I've seen it so many times. So get into the habit of locking your screen. Some other, so the toolkit, the GDPR toolkit, provides you with all of the policies to apply all of these as well. There are also organizational measures, and those are pseudonymization and anonymization. Module 7 of our e-learning platform gives you a lot more details about those, how to apply them, when to apply them, etc. But what the regulation says when it comes to security is that you as an organization, so us, me, myself as well, you have to apply all reasonable security measures. So the honor is on you to justify why you're not using pseudonymization, for example, why you're not operating a clear desk policy. So you have to justify it, because it is not reasonable for you to do so. Okay, so just bear that in mind. So, and finally, what is the risk? So if you do nothing or very little, then what are your risks? So the ICO, the regulator, has the power to fine you between 2 to 4% of your annual turnover. But even if it's just £1,000, can your cash flow take it? I know I'd rather have £1,000 in my bank account. So this is a possibility. But they can also name you and shame you publicly on their website as well as on social media. And this is more likely to happen the more of a small business you are. And all of these can then, as a consequence, damage your reputation. So the credibility that you work so hard to create and develop could be gone in a flash. You could be disqualified as a director. Again, on the website of the ICO, there is the list of all the directors that have been disqualified. It could lead to loss of current and future customers. You could also face legal claims from your customers and your employees. And this is, all of this, the consequences are actually extremely likely. So really ask yourself, can you take the risk? Can you really, take this risk of doing nothing or little? Just to, spend a little bit of time, a little bit of money. Is not expensive to actually get yourself educate and empower yourself, because there is only benefit from it rather than anything else. So can you recover if you do nothing or not enough? And that's me. Thank you for listening. This is how you can get in touch with me. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Deborah. So I'm going to stop.
Hello.
Hang on.
Right, I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see my screen. So I'm Deborah Samuel. I've been working as the computer guru for the past 16 years, and I have a master's in computer security. So the first question that I always ask is, what is cybersecurity? Well, it's not just about antivirus. It's about acknowledging, about recognizing about understanding and mitigating and minimizing the risks to yourself and your business. But it's also about recovering from a situation. A lot of people ask me, why does my business need it? We're too small. We're just solopreneurs. We're a local business. Nobody's going to target us. We've got nothing to steal. Why should anybody target us? Well, I'm really sorry, but I'm here to say that's all wrong. Here's why. 82% of businesses use online banking. 59% of businesses use their social media accounts to get business, to keep business, to just tell people what they're doing. 58% of businesses keep personal information about customers. 30% of businesses use online ordering, booking, or payments. And 46% of us have got network connected devices. Now that can be as simple as having a printer that's online, or your iPad, your mobile device. If any of those were breached, then you'd be in real trouble. Imagine if somebody got into your Instagram account that you've been building up for the last 5 years, and all of your customers see your Instagram posts. What would that do to your business? Hiscox, who are the insurance company, say that one small business in the UK is hacked every 19 seconds. Now that's actually a stat from 2019, and it's, I'm quite sure, a lot smaller than that now. So there's one word that's missing from that. It's successfully hacked. So while we've been looking at this slide, another small business in the UK has been hacked. I just want to make sure that it isn't you. Robert Mueller from the FBI said in 2012 that there are only two types of companies: those that have been hacked and those that will be. And that is as true today, if not more true, than it was back in 2012. Now it's about people. There are only two types of people: those that have been compromised and those that haven't been compromised. And those that haven't been compromised are just lucky. Even the FSB reported in 2022, in February, that small firms were sitting ducks for cyber attacks. So the business world is recognizing that micro businesses, solopreneurs, small businesses are targets. In the US, the rise of mom and pop businesses are being attacked by cyber criminals has increased horrendously. Here in the UK, it's the same. So I've given you the scary bits. Now let's look at what you should do. Don't be an ostrich and bury your head in the sand. Okay? Look at your business, recognize your risks, learn how to make sure that you have covered yourself and you're able to mitigate them to the best of your ability. And this isn't about GDPR. This is purely about keeping your business running. As in the same way as Cristina had her 3 T's, I've got my 3 B's. Back up, back up, back up. I cannot stress enough the importance of making sure that your systems are backed up. Make sure that you've got adequate computer protection, whether that be an antivirus, firewall, VPN, whatever's right for you and your business. And what's right for somebody else isn't necessarily right for me, for you. I've had customers come to me and say, we've heard all of that about this with a VPN. Do we need it for our business? And I've said, well, no, you don't. You don't do enough. You don't do enough of the things that VPNs will help you with. So why pay extra? And start your business, continue your business the way you mean to go on, with good cyber security procedures in place. Things like encryption, password hygiene, and GDPR. Start that way. Make it part of your everyday processes, in which case it doesn't become a big thing. It's just part of your everyday processing. Now, let me talk about passwords. Passwords are the easiest way to keep secure, and they're also the easiest way to get hacked. In fact, that 43% where it's that Cristina said of GDPR saying that there was it was user issues, many of those are to do with passwords, that the passwords have been compromised. The thing that I hear the most is, oh, but I've got so many passwords, I'll never remember them. Well, actually, you don't need to remember them. I say to people, actually, I haven't got a problem with you writing your passwords down, putting them in a book. What I've got a problem with is putting in a book that's got the big title passwords on it and leaving it by the computer. Okay, if you have to write your passwords down, make sure that once you've used that password, it's taken away, put somewhere completely different and locked up. The other problem that people say to me is, yeah, well, I just use the same password because I can never remember it. That is the quickest way to be hacked, without a doubt. So what can you put into place? Well, you can use something called 2FA, or multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication and multi-factor authentication. We're all used, if we use online banking, to have one of these devices where you have to put your card in, or you get a text before you can go forward. Make sure that any app that you use, anything that you use, has this multi-factor authentication. And what that means is that as well as having the password, they also have to have access to that second authentication method, whether it be your mobile phone, whether it be a device like the banks give out where you have to put your card in. They've got to have both of those to sign in. So it's not just about having the password. And the other thing that you can use is a password manager. And they're fairly cheap. You can actually get them for free. They may be already part of your antivirus protection that you already pay for. But even if you buy a separate one, we're only talking £30 a year, maybe. And for that, you then can put all of your passwords in one place. You have one very, very strong password to cover it, and then you're secure. You've got all of your data in one place. Yes, you do run the risk that company will itself be breached, but they will tell you about this. It does happen. It has happened with a company called LastPass quite recently. So people do get scared about it. But the risk of that versus the risk of being hacked, if you just use the same password, are just so completely far away from each other. Let's talk about emails. Okay. Emails are not secure. Full stop. Somebody could get your password and get into your email account. Somebody could be sitting outside your house and logging into your Wi-Fi. There are lots of ways that emails are not secure. And what I would say to you, if you send important information, think of other ways of sending them. perhaps use clouds to pass information across, use registered emails, especially if you're in the financial arena. Look at alternatives. But there are ways to improve your email verification. SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. I'm not going to read all of this. You can read it when you get the PDF of this webinar. Suffice it to say that you can make sure that your domain, your .co.uk, .com, .org, whatever you're using, has specific measures in place that show the person that you're sending it to that it's actually coming from you. These are free. This is not an you don't know how to do it, go to somebody who does. And then make that you can go to whoever set up your domain. They should be able to help you, or a cyber security person like myself will be able to help you set up SPF and DKIM. Let's talk about a couple of types of attack. I had a training company who received a ransomware attack. Now, ransomware attack is, it came very much to light when the NHS was ransomed, 2018, I believe it was. And basically, they corrupt your data and refuse to uncorrupt your data, unencrypt your data until you've paid them something. The first thing I would say, don't pay it. The police recommend, don't pay it. There is no guarantee that your data will be unencrypted. And it just propagates the whole system. And John will talk more about that when he comes to his part of the webinar. However, in this particular instance, this training company was corrupted because his wife used the same computer and clicked on an email, a personal email that she went on to. It was extremely lucky, but I had backed up the data to a network attached storage device the previous day. Prior to that, he'd just been using a USB device, which would also have been corrupted. And I was able to get his system back online by just wiping the computer, putting it back on. It cost him 2 days of work. Had it not happened, he would have been, they were asking for something like £25,000 at the time. He would have been out of business, full stop. He could not work without his data. So making sure you've got the right processes in place to make sure that not only do you back up, but that your backup is accessible. The next type of attack that I'd like to talk about is an environmental waste company. And they had a business email compromise attack. And what happened there was it was a small two-man business in the office, but they had drivers who would go out and collect environmental waste and dispose of it properly. Their email account was compromised, and the hackers got hold of their password. And they didn't do anything until they saw an invoice going out, at which point they copied the invoice, they played around with it, and they sent the invoice, or sent a message to an email to the client saying, listen, we've changed our bank details, please use these bank details. We've heard it used with solicitors when during house purchases, but basically the client paid the new bank details, and it wasn't found for a couple of months when the environmental waste company went, you haven't paid us yet. Yes, we have. You told us you changed your bank. No, we didn't. And that was when it was identified. This invoice was for a 6-digit sum. Again, it would have put that company out of business. Luckily, in this particular instance, the client also accepted responsibility, half the responsibility, because they said they should have followed up. In this particular instance, the email account didn't have MFA on it, multi-factor authentication, so anybody could get into that email account. These are two ways that you can be attacked. Here are my details. I'm happy to give you advice. I give monthly webinars on cybersecurity, things that, as Cristina says, you don't know what you don't know. Even if you don't come to me, please, I beg of you, speak to a cybersecurity consultant or somebody who knows, because you've spent a lot of time building up your business. Don't let somebody else take it away from you. Thank you very much. And I will now stop and hand you over to John.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Very informative. Let me share my screen and we'll jump straight in. So, hi everyone, John from East Yorkshire Insurance Brokers, and today I just want to really extend, especially what Deborah's been saying in regards to cyber liability. And Deborah, there's a couple of really interesting facts that you've mentioned there, and I'll probably refer back to them in a moment. First of all, though, what actually is cyber liability? And in essence, cyber liability, as it says on the screen, it covers you against the cost of IT hacking. Now, that extends to also once you suffer a data breach from a hack, that can involve things along the lines of mitigation, it can involve PR costs, it can involve forensic costs, and it can also involve loss of income. As an example, your website may be down, your computers may be down, meaning ultimately, as a business, you cannot trade. It can also potentially cover ransom demands, but I will come back to that one in a little while, because that gets a little bit complicated. So the basics, first of all, are what actually do you need under a cyber liability policy? Well, typically, we would recommend a minimum sums insured of £100,000. But to be honest with you, once a business suffers a data breach and an insurance company get involved with that data breach, the costs can very quickly spiral. So £100,000 minimum, but you might want to be looking at $250,000, you might want to be looking at $500,000. It really depends on the size of your business. Excesses, believe it or not, under a cyber liability policy can be quite high. Typically on most policies, excesses start from about £1,000. But again, that sounds a lot, but because you potentially insurance companies could be paying out tens of thousands of pounds for a data breach, that is why your excesses are high. With certain companies, Beazley are a great example of this. They will actually waive that excess on certain parts of the claim as long as you meet certain requirements. A cyber liability policy also can sometimes be added to your existing policy. So if you are a business where you're providing advice and you have professional indemnity, with certain companies like Hiscox, Markel, and similar companies, they will actually let you add cyber liability onto your policy. The one thing I will stress about that, under a full cyber liability policy, which I'll go over in more detail in a moment, it covers both the first party, which would be you as the policy holder, and also the third party, which would be your clients. So if you had an add-on from Hiscox, it would only cover you as a first party. Now, which is good because that still gives you some level of cover, and for small micro businesses is potentially a lot more affordable than taking out a full cyber liability policy. But what it does mean, if you accidentally infect your clients with a virus, that wouldn't be covered by an add-on policy, whereas it would be covered by a full cyber standalone policy. Premiums, it's really hard to say this. I've put £150 as a starting premium on there. It can actually be less than that, but realistically, it's probably going to be more than that. A cyber policy very much depends on what you're turning over the year and what your trade is. They're your two main factors for a premium with a cyber policy. If you're a construction company, and you're predominantly out and about during the day and you're just using your IT systems to process your invoices, your quotes, etc., you're not on it day to day like I am, for example, you're probably going to have a lower premium. Whereas if you're like myself and you're providing financial services or with sensitive information, it's more likely that you will be at a higher level in terms of premium. And I've already mentioned about the first party and third party cover. So the question is, who needs cyber liability? And you probably won't be surprised by my first point here. Everybody needs cyber liability, but especially those businesses who have some form of sensitive data. So I think going back to Deborah's presentation, she mentioned on there that 58% keep some form of personal information. Obviously, that could be, date of birth, it could be bank details, it could be addresses, passport numbers, anything along those lines. And that is a type of information which, if hackers was to get a hold of, it could cause you issues down the line with the ICO and potentially having to pay fines and penalties. Now, in 2022, according to a government report, 4 in 10 businesses suffered from a data breach. So again, this goes back to obviously the Hiscox facts that Deborah shared us. And so that's 40% of businesses in 2022 suffered some form of data breach. On average, that cost those businesses £4,200. But you can imagine that's an average. So some of those businesses, it maybe only cost them a couple of £1,000 to put right. But then for some other businesses, it could have cost a lot more, depending on what the issue on the data breach was. And you'll see for your larger businesses, that figure is substantially higher, as obviously the amount of data potentially will increase as well. In terms of the type of attack, according to that same report, 83% of these attacks were phishing attacks. We probably, everyone on this call, will get those emails which have a dodgy link on, and unfortunately, occasionally those links get clicked, which then cause a problem. Other attacks are things like denial of service, malware and ransomware attacks. And obviously, if you want more details in terms of those types of sort of potential cyber vulnerabilities, that's something that Deborah would be able to advise you about. Now, that's the general basics of an actual cyber liability, but in terms of types of cover that a cyber liability policy provides you with, initially it will cover investigation costs. So what does that mean? It means who suffered the breach. I had an incident about a year ago now, similar to what Deborah was saying, where one of my clients had sent their client an invoice for an amount to be paid. When it reached the end client, the bank details had been changed. Thankfully, in this situation, the client or the end client contacted my client to query it and no payments were made, so an issue was avoided. However, the insurance company got involved, they investigated, was the breach at my client's end or was it at their client's end? And they were able to investigate that and see where the breach came from. Also, the location of the attack. So if someone is requesting a ransom demand from you, it is very important we know where they're coming from, because obviously there's things like sanctions and there's a lot of issues at the moment with Russia, and you cannot pay a ransom to places like Russia and other areas. You shouldn't be paying a ransom, but I'll come back to that. Data recovery as well as part of that investigation, and also forensic costs. And forensic costs can be very expensive depending on what the issues are, what needs to be investigated. Does also cover your PR as well. So you need to notify your clients. You've suffered a data breach. You need to let your clients know. Now, I believe the process of this is you have to email your clients, you have to call your clients, and you have to write to your clients. And depending on the number of clients you have, that can be very time consuming and expensive, and that will also be covered under the cyber liability policy. I've put fines and penalties under PR as well, and also social media. Now, in terms of a cyber liability policy, they will help you identify any notifications you need to make and potentially make those notifications for you. They won't necessarily pay the fines and penalties for you. That will depend on the wording and the type of details that you have on your particular policy. Extending from that, you've also got business interruption. So I touched on this slightly earlier. If you're an online company, you maybe have an Etsy site, or you're selling your wallpaper, your product that you're selling online, and your website is shut down for a week, 2 weeks because of a cyber attack. During that time, you can't trade. So your cyber policy will cover your loss of income during that time for whilst you can trade, whilst your website is down. Similar basis to that, you may have your IT systems go down, so you can't trade, you can't email, or you may just have increased cost of working because you have to go out and buy new laptops. You have to go out and sort a new IT systems for the time being whilst this is sorted. There was quite, in Hull, there was quite a high profile one recently where one of the local schools, the academies, suffered from a cyber attack. And I think it was about 3 months before any of the teachers were able to log back on to the system and start putting all their work back through the system. They was having to completely do it offline or use pen and paper, which I'm sure was fun for them. Obviously coming finally to ransoms. So yes, at a last resort, insurers will pay a ransom, but it really is the last resort. And I think, if I'm honest, I can see this changing, but it will only change if it's put into law. Now, the last thing that the insurance companies want to do is let Mr. Hacker know that they are dealing with something like Hiscox or Beasley, because all of a sudden that £25,000 ransom will turn into a £100,000 ransom. But what the insurance companies will do, they will deal with the hacker on your behalf, and they will do what they can to recover that information and avoid paying the hacker. And it is the last thing that any insurance company wants to do. So the thing I want to stress is a lot of the objections I get is my IT company will sort it. Now, this is true to an extent. However, it's unlikely that an IT company will be able to help you with some of the points I've just mentioned. So, they can potentially help investigate it. If you've got all your data backed up, they can potentially help recover your data. But what they're not going to be able to do is help you with those PR costs, the mitigation. They're certainly not going to pay any ransoms for you. They're highly unlikely to cover any additional forensic costs for any specialists that need to get involved. And obviously, they're definitely not going to be able to help you out for your loss of income or any potential fines that you may suffer because of the attack as well. I'll just quickly go over what your typical insurer requirements are. Now, this will vary from insurance to insurance, but it's fairly typical across the board that these are the minimum levels that insurance companies want. So, as Deborah was mentioning, you need to back up your data. Now, Deborah will advise on this more, but just backing up to your Google, your Microsoft, that's not a backup, that's just a cloud base. But Deborah will be able to advise on that more. But you need it to be a code of an offline location where it is regularly backed up. Typically, insurance companies want it probably to be backed up every 7 or 14 days, but that is something you'll be able to disclose to the insurance company. Multi-factor authentication, this is a standard pretty much requirement across the board now for all insurance companies. So if you've got your emails, when you're logging onto your emails, it'll send you a text, or you'll have an app with Microsoft or Android, etc., and it gives you that extra form of protection. I know I've been doing it recently to access some information through a government server, and the first thing they do is they send you a text, they send you an email to provide that extra part of security. a lot of these, what I always say to my clients, it's about locking the front door, it's about shutting the windows. You wouldn't go out your house and you wouldn't leave your back door, your front door wide open. You'd shut it, you'd lock it. And that's what essentially these are doing to avoid potential claims. You don't allow remote access into your environment without a VPN. If you're just office based, typically insurance companies aren't too concerned about a VPN. But if you're going out and about, you're going to a cafe, you're going to a client, and then you're logging into your system, that's when they want a VPN to be in place. And also, very importantly, that you're providing some form of cybersecurity awareness training to your employees, so they know to be aware of potential phishing attacks and other forms of data that may be coming through. I've not popped it on there as well, but again, obviously, insurance companies would expect you to have all your antiviruses, your firewalls, and all of that up to date as well. Just very briefly then, just to kind of summarise on what I've mentioned there, and things to make you aware of. A lot of the times when I speak to clients now, I say, you're not going to have an employer's liability claim. You're unlikely, unless you're a construction company. You're not going to have, a third-party public liability claim. What's more than likely nowadays is to suffer from a data breach and to make a cyber liability claim. Costs can very quickly spiral on a cyber liability policy. So that goes back to you making sure you have a sufficient indemnity level, but that's something you would discuss, with your insurance broker. Lock the door, as I mentioned. And typically quotes are actually pretty straightforward. For me to provide somebody with a quotation, typically I need the turnover, your number of employees, your website address, and your years established. And that's about it. One thing I will mention is, if anyone is a FSB member, double check this with the FSB, because it's not quite up to date information, but I know under an FSB membership, they used to, and probably still do, provide you with cyber liability up to about £50,000 automatically as part of their membership. So if anyone does have FSB, it's worthwhile double checking that, because you might actually have some cover that you have already. And if anyone is Cyber Essentials certified, normally you get some form of cyber liability insurance within your Cyber Essentials as well. But that is that from, and as Deborah said, don't bury your head in the sand. If you realise there's a data breach, report it to your insurance company and Deborah. But that brings us to the end of mine. I'm John Roberts. If anyone does have any questions relating to cyber liability or the general business insurance, you can come and have a chat with me. And Christine, I think I'm going to pass back to you for some Q&As.
Yes, thank you very much, John, and Deborah for your presentation. So yes, so we are now going to open up to Q&A. So we have some pre-submitted, but there is one in the Q&A. So I'm going to go to that one first. So Deborah, this one is for you.
That's lovely.
If using 365 Office, then that is backed up on the cloud, or do we need to save files elsewhere too?
Okay, so the cloud is a very confusing place. And I think most people are confused by what the cloud is. Google Cloud, Microsoft 365, all of these cloud providers are just that. They are providers. It is not a backup. And even Microsoft itself recommends that if you are using Microsoft 365, if you're using Google Drive, if you're using OneDrive, if you're using any of these, you should 100% be backing it up in another way. Now that can be, if you're, as John called it, a cold backup, which is something that you're backing it directly to perhaps a hard drive, another somewhere else that is not on the same system, or whether you're backing it up to another cloud provider. It is important that you do a second backup. And again, it doesn't have to cost the earth. It really doesn't. These are all very scary for solopreneurs, but there are ways of providing backup at a fairly reasonable amount. I also would like to bring up at this point that not all cloud providers are equal, especially when you talk about GDPR, because some cloud providers may not be based in the UK, and therefore their data is not, you have to make sure that you've checked that their GDPR rules, or their because they're a third party supplier, that you have covered your GDPR commitments and that they are okay. Another one is that if you're just using something like Google Drive because it gives you free access, or because you don't keep a great deal of data, they're not all equal. Google actually specify that if you're using their free data plans, they can access your data. They actually put it in their terms and conditions. And granted, you've got to read down 35 pages of it to actually get to that point, but it's something you need to consider, and especially if you have personal data that should be covered under GDPR rules. If you're just keeping them on a Google Drive backup because you've got that 5 gig free, you need to think about that.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. And to add to that, so Deborah is correct. You need to know, who your server provider is, and where they're going to be storing that data. So, for example, Amazon, you can ask for your storage to be in the UK or the EU, but otherwise, if you don't specify, very often it's straight away automatically is the US. And when it comes to that, if you remember earlier on, I said that under the GDPR as a controller, you have certain obligations. And one of those obligations, it's about cross-border transfer. So transferring data to the US requires additional safeguards for you to put in place. I'm not going to go into the details of that. The GDPR toolkit that I mentioned earlier contains all of the tools that you need for that. But the easiest way to go around it is to make sure that you select providers that are operating within the UK and the EU, so that data can freely can flow freely backwards and forwards. So you do have the obligation. So please bear that in mind. So, for example, I chose Xero as my accounting system because they are a New Zealand-based organization, and New Zealand has an adequacy status. Therefore, data can be transferred there. QuickBook is US. So if you want to use QuickBook, you need to do certain activities with regards to cross-border transfer. Same with MailChimp. So I use MailerLite, for example, for my mailing list, for my newsletter, because the data is stored in the EU. MailChimp, the data is in the US. So if I wanted to use MailChimp, I need to do additional work to satisfy those obligations that I have as a controller. So I avoid that by choosing a EU provider. So just bear in mind, you do have the obligation to carry out a due diligence when you are bringing in a new provider, like a server storage. And then if you do decide to go with someone that it's in the US, you need to do additional or put in place additional safeguards as per the GDPR. So just to remind everybody to please use the Q&A to ask your questions. I'm now going to go to one of those that were pre-submitted. So I've got one for you, John. Can cyber liability insurance cover the cost of notifying affected customers and providing credit monitoring service in the event of a data breach?
Say that again, sorry, Cristina.
Can cyber liability insurance cover the cost of notifying affected customers and providing credit monitoring services in the event of a data breach?
Okay. Potentially, yes. So your cyber liability policy will cover you to essentially investigate it, and if there needs to be a monitoring period. I'm not sure if it was more referring to fines. And your cyber liability policy will potentially pay fines, but it depends on what is covered within the wording, and there are certain sort of fines that legally they're not allowed to pay for.
Okay. Thank you, John. So there is one for me. Do I need to report all data breaches to the ICO? So the very simple answer is no, you don't. You only need to report those that are of a high severity impact. So you need to assess the impact of the data breach to the affected individuals. And then but you've got 72 hours to do that. So if it's of a low severity, then you don't report to the ICO and you do not need to notify the customers. It's only when it's high risk, high severity. In the GDPR toolkit, there is a tool to assess that helps you to assess the severity of the data breach through a series of questions that need to be taken into consideration. And based on that, you can then make the decision whether it needs to be reported and therefore also notified and communicated to the clients or not. Okay. I'm going, right, so there's another one for you, Deborah. Do I need Cyber Essentials?
Cyber Essentials is now becoming more necessary. Without a doubt, if you are interacting with government departments or organisations such as the NHS, they will demand and require Cyber Essentials. Failing that, you can actually do the Cyber Essentials website will actually, you can look at all of the questions on there and you can cover them yourself. But if you need the documentation, then then yes, you will do it. But I can actually see in the next 2 to 3 years that coming in to be a very useful tool.
Thank you, Deborah. One more for you, John. What step can businesses take to mitigate cyber risk and potentially lower their cyber liability insurance premiums?
So I think the main step is to have IT processes in place. So as we sort of discussed in my webinar part, there are typical requirements that a cyber liability policy will automatically require. To be completely honest, for a small micro business, it's probably not going to make any difference to the premium because they would expect them to have those IT security systems in place to have the policy. Once you start getting to large businesses, potentially insurance companies might expect you to have things like Cyber Essentials or have additional training, and then that could potentially reduce your premium. What is starting to happen more and more with insurance policies now, it's not so much about reducing the premium, but once a policy is on cover, insurance companies will quite often do soft checks on a business that they've insured, so then they can feed back to that business, information that they've found out to help them improve on their cybersecurity.
Thank you, John. Last one, for me, I only have a small amount of data. Do I still have to comply with the regulation? The short answer is yes, I'm afraid, because if you have personal data, you still are liable to those obligations, to those principles that we saw earlier. Your customers still have rights. So it's not necessarily the volume of it. It's the fact that you process it, that you collect it, that you use it, that you store it. So yes, you still need to comply. There are no more live questions, at least they've not come through. So we've just gone over a little bit. So if there are nothing coming else, no more question coming through, then I propose we close the call. So thank you everybody for joining us. you will receive, as I said, a small survey which will help us to improve for the future as we do these free webinars, but also give you the opportunity to request the recording if you want it. So thank you everyone for taking part, and I hope that the information that we share with you was useful and informative and of value. Thank you, Daxa. And that's it. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.